It's the morning commute, and welcome to micandbike. It's a chillier day now, chilly day in this great Pacific Northwest. I could actually see my breath a little this morning. It's always gives you a nice brisk feeling going down the hill first thing in the morning. If you haven't had any chance to work up a sweat and you're getting that cold breeze on you, like now. Already people out walking. Hello. Wonder what they're doing here. This construction signs. Doing something in the sidewalk. I guess they're likely going to repair that sidewalk or something, or they put something underneath. I'm listening to a recitation of a piece of prose on This American Life about jazz in the Czech Republic, and not too interested. I've never been all that interested in jazz, gotta say. I'm more of a classical man myself. I could appreciate some rock and pop, but classical, that's my main go-to when it comes to music. Folk too, I like folk. Like a mansion, it's kind of out of place on this street. These big old homes, and kind of a gaudy early 2000s style. There's the kids sitting on their nice chair or their couch at the bus stop. That's good. That's the best. Morning. It reminds me of the couch in the middle of the housing complex that the drug dealers hung out at in The Wire. That was their base of operations, this couch in the middle of the lawn. Good morning. Yeah, The Wire was a pretty good show. I did like it. I like the first season's best. I'm always a sucker for those tragic characters that fight against the machine. The cop McNulty waging a good fight against the powers that be at the police department, trying to do the good thing to bring down the real criminals instead of worrying about silly statistics. Yeah, that's always appealed to me. People who are willing to pursue what's right, and regardless of all of the forces against them and everything. One thing I didn't like about that was that McNulty kind of undid himself in that series. he was a pretty flawed character, which I suppose everybody is, but it would have been a little more gratifying, I suppose, if he had been a little less self-destructive as a character. But I don't think that was the objective of the writers of the show. If McNulty had been less self-destructive, it would have made him even more of a hero. The way it ended, McNulty kind of did himself in, and you admired him a bit for some of the good he did, but on the other hand, you kind of felt he dug his own grave. All his boozing and cheating on his wife and his girlfriend. Oh well. There are no more heroes in the world. It's the age of the anti-hero. So who are the great heroes? Oh goodness, let's think. Heroes of literature. Well, I guess like Jean Valjean and Victor Hugo, and then the chap who escaped from jail in the Comte de Monte Cristo. He was pretty heroic. Although he did pursue a vendetta, a vengeance against those who had wronged him. But somehow it felt pure and right. Yeah, I've read some Victor Hugo. I like some of his books. Let's see. Other great heroes. Well, I think recently I was thinking of my favorite American presidents, and one of them, morning. So right now, I'd say my current favorite American president has got to be Warren Harding. The guy, somebody going by me there. It's not too hard to pass me on a bike, that's for sure. So Warren Harding, I think he became president in like 1920 or 1921, and the American economy was in the dump, in a big recession after, or depression actually, after World War I. And Warren, threw all advice to the wind and decided that the right thing to do was get the government spending under control. He cut spending, cut government, and it didn't raise one tax. And lo and behold, the economy started doing really well. In a couple years, it was really booming. Of course, one could argue that that's correlation, not necessarily causation. However, it certainly makes one wonder if greater spending or stimulus would have helped. And certainly his cutting of government spending certainly didn't seem to hurt. I honestly think Warren Harding was hugely responsible for a lot of the boom and the economic growth in the 1920s. So I think there's a lot we can owe to Harding. He also was quite insightful and ahead of his time in approach to civil rights. He felt that there needed to be more protections and rights for African Americans. The big failing in Mr. Harding, or President Harding, was that he was a poor manager. He appointed several of his appointees to cabinet, wound up engaging in quite a lot of graft and corruption, and those scandals, the resulting scandals, really undermined Harding and his reputation. It's unfortunate that he died before he could serve out a second term. Who knows what would have happened? I don't know. Interestingly, President Lincoln has undergone a little bit of a rehabilitation in my mind in the last year. I used to think of Lincoln as a terrible president, and I felt that a lot of the horrors of the Civil War could be laid at his feet, and that he ran rough over the Constitution, imprisoning people without cause or due process. And why did he have to go to war against the South? He didn't have to. He could have just let them secede. On the other hand, so that's the way I've thought about it, and particularly the things he did in office that frankly violated the Constitution. They really diminished his image in my eyes. Well, in the last year I've been reading a lot of books about the Civil War and several about President Lincoln, and my perspective has changed. And interestingly, the thing that's changed it the most is to read more about the South and the Southern leaders of the time. And I realize now just how hypocritical and frankly evil the guys in the South were. Not everybody in the South, but a lot of the leaders. And that pretty much the only reason they wanted to secede was to keep slavery. It's pretty hard to lend any kind of moral support to people whose primary goal in life was to preserve slavery. All this revisionism about how the Civil War was about states' rights and preserving way of life. It's all code for just preserving slavery. And the state, there was only one state right that mattered, and that was the right to have slaves. That was the only, if that hadn't been, all this talk about tariffs too, they talk about how the Civil War occurred because the North was oppressing the South with their high tariffs that unduly impacted the South. I'm not sure that's really true, but even, because when you look at it, it's not at all clear, but even if one was to say that tariffs were onerous, that's not why the South seceded. The issue of tariffs was minor. I think it was Calhoun who was a Southern politician and pushing the issue of tariffs in the 1850s, and even he talked a whole lot about slavery. So, I don't know. I just have very little time for these arguments about how the Civil War was not about slavery. Let's put it another way. Secession was 99.999. Secession was 99.99% inspired by a desire to preserve slavery. Now the war, when the North fought to prevent the South from seceding, the war is a little bit trickier. Because why did the North take up arms to prevent the secession? This is a debatable point, because everything I've read doesn't prove or disprove that there was a right in the Constitution to secede or not. So it really seems to pretty much be an open point. And in a way, that's what the Civil War was doing, was deciding if states had the right to unilaterally secede or not. One could argue that since the Constitution doesn't limit secession, therefore it must be allowed. But even that's an ambiguous reading. And the more I read about the Civil War as well, and the causes of secession, the more I wonder what the heck these guys in the South, were the leaders pushing for secession, were trying to accomplish. Because there was no fear of slavery or of abolition, general abolition at the time. Lincoln didn't support abolition. He was not an abolitionist, calling for the end of the cessation of all slavery everywhere. There was very little political support for it. So there was very little risk of slavery being abolished in the southern states. The real issue at the time was whether slavery should be extended to the new territories, to Kansas, to all the other states opening up in the West as settlement continued. But how the heck would secession have helped with that? This is what baffles me, is as a separate nation, how could the Confederate States hope to guarantee that new territories settled in the West would be slave territories? I mean, the North would have become rapidly abolitionist without the southern states, since there was very little support for the institution of slavery itself in the North, and therefore any territories settled by the North would have absolutely not accepted slavery at all. And the North had much more population than the South for settling new territories, and many more immigrants were going to the North than to the South. So if the southern states had even succeeded with their dream of having an independent nation, I don't see how they could have possibly succeeded in keeping the new territories, as in ensuring that the new territories would be slave territories. So, that being the case, what could they possibly hope to accomplish through independence? It seems very short-sighted. I don't know. For some reason, the slaveholders at the time were getting more and more emboldened. Maybe because of the wealth generated through cotton or something. They felt that somehow they could dictate terms better than ever. Well, that brings to an end our discussion for today. And thanks for tuning in to the latest episode of Mike and Bike. And I'll see you all later.